I'm Charlie Innes. I'm one of the vets here, and I have the honor of introducing our speaker tonight, Dr. Brian Windmiller. Brian's the executive director and founder of Grassroots Conservation, which is doing a lot of great local work here in Massachusetts for protecting and studying our rare local species. A lot of the more internationally known species and more charismatic large fauna tend to get more attention than some of the things Brian's going to talk about tonight. So it's good to have people like Brian that will pay attention to small, rare, local things.
To the extent that I have like a job title, I would call myself a conservation biologist. That's what I studied for my graduate work, and I've worked in all kinds of different ways for 30-ish years now, working on here in eastern Massachusetts on trying to do things that would keep some of our rarer animal and plant species, I mostly work on the animal side, from getting rarer still or from disappearing. Right? And that's what conservation biologists do, right? We try and use biological principles, biological knowledge to affect what's happening in the world regarding the status of species that are at some risk of decline or extinction because of human action, primarily nowadays. And one kind of question I've had pause to ask myself a lot over time is, what is this work, right? If you think about it, is this basically desperate last stand kind of thing? If you're a conservation biologist, is it all about trying to protect whatever little scraps of nature are left in the face of the juggernaut that is human population and human development? And every year, no matter how hard you work at it, every year there's less, right? Every year there's more people, less wild space, right? Is that what my job is all about? That's what I think it has classically been conceived of. Or is there another way to look at being a conservation biologist and to say, are there any opportunities, are there possibilities for doing something, big or small, that might leave the situation in some number of years a little bit better? Is it possible to make forward progress, not just to slow down the rate of loss? Anyway, my work with this nonprofit has been, and the results we'll see, 20 years, 30 years, but my work with this nonprofit is founded on the idea that maybe that latter possibility is possible. Because after all, if I have to be a conservation biologist for the rest of my life, it's pretty depressing, right, to do the former model. So for whatever it's worth, I try and do the latter. Let's start out globally, and then we'll focus in pretty quickly on here in Massachusetts, right? Seen from space, there's a composite image many of you probably know from NASA. Seen from space, the world looks a lot different than it used to. I was born in 1960. Anybody know about how many people there were in the world in 1960? Okay, let's start with now, 2015. How many people are in the world right now?
7 billion.
Yeah, more than 7. Kind of something like 7.2 billion. How about 1960, when I was born? Right around 1960, by best demographic estimates, the world ticked 3 billion. Okay, so over the course of my life, more than twice as many people on the world. We're way richer. We've got much bigger cities. When you look at the Earth from space, you see at night a lot of lights where all those cities are. Right? So we have an enormous impact on every square inch of every ecosystem on Earth. And the idea of pristine nature, a place where you can somehow observe nature completely unaffected by what humans do, right? It doesn't work so well in the 21st century. But one of the curious things about what's going on in terms of conservation globally is if you take it, let's take an alien's perspective on this, right? We, one species out of 10 million, who knows, species on the face of the Earth, we co-opt almost all of the world's resources. We, by our actions, are driving many of our fellow species to the brink of extinction. But we, paradoxically, also do what those people on the bottom are doing, what the New England Aquarium does. Right? The New England Aquarium, what Charlie Innes was talking about. Charlie just took Allison and Leah, our intern, and I on a tour of the turtle rescue facility in Quincy. And all these people are spending huge amounts of their effort, huge amounts of their time, and quite a bit of money, trying to help out other species, the same species that other individuals of our particular species, right, are causing harm to. It's an interesting paradox. Interesting thing about this, too, Charlie and I were talking about this a teeny bit, and look at what those people are doing, right? They are helping out this particular sea turtle, right, not by like just sending money or signing a petition. They're carrying the animal, right? Maybe carrying it on the way to releasing it. There's something about that hands-on bit of being involved that really speaks to people. And I'll come to that more. The traditional way of going about wildlife conservation is very hands-off. And the United States, to its great credit, pioneered the whole concept of wildlife refuges for the sake of conservation. Right? Where was the first national wildlife refuge in the world opened? Anybody know? What state?
Wyoming.
No? Cool. Florida. Why? What was it there to protect? There's a hint in the picture, right? See the hat? The hat is made up of huge piles of egret feathers. In the early part of the 20th century, big wading birds were driven to the verge of extinction by people hunting them for their feathers so that they could decorate fancy hats and sell them in New York and Paris. And the wildlife refuge system worked. None of our big wading birds went extinct. They're all more common than they were in the early part of the 20th century. So it's a good model to some extent. You declare this is now a refuge. You put up a fence, you hire guards. The first guard of the first wildlife refuge in Florida, a guy named Guy Bradley, was killed, by the way, by poachers. But they hired another guard. You put up a fence, you declare an area protected, you hire guards, you stop people to some extent from hunting those animals. It's been a remarkably successful thing. But we live in a different reality now, right? With many times more people than there were in 1900, with much more sophisticated technology available to them, including automatic weapons available to the poachers. And simply setting up a refuge and doing hands-off conservation usually doesn't work, often doesn't work. What kind of rhino is this? Anybody know? I'm going to bug you a lot with these kind of trivial questions. Anybody know? I know some of you know. This is a northern white rhino, maybe the rarest mammal in the world. As somebody corrected me earlier, right? There are now 4 of them. A couple of weeks ago, there were 5. There are now 4 of them left in existence. They are on a private game ranch in Kenya. That's not where the last wild ones were. The last wild ones were in a national park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Did the national park work to keep out poaching when the DRC was in the middle of a huge civil war? No, it didn't work at all. Didn't matter. Right? The last wild ones were killed around 2005. There's 1 male left in the world and 3 females. They're all old. If this species will be saved, and there's a fair chance that it will be saved not by being hands-off. It will be saved like this guy is sort of demonstrating, giving the rhino a little coochie coo. This was a rhino that was raised in captivity. That's why it allows him to give a coochie coo to the rhino. It will be saved by people, right, like Charlie, doing in vitro fertilization, by implanting embryos in surrogate moms of southern white rhinos, by really intensive, really expensive, really hands-on conservation. And more of the species in our world, if they are to continue to be around, will require not just declaring new refuges, but will require various kinds of intensive hands-on interventions. So up in the top right, California condor. What's going on with the California condor chick? Somebody with a puppet, a California condor puppet, feeding the chick. The chick is being raised in captivity. The last 17 California condors on Earth were flying in the wild in the 1980s, and they were going to zero really quick. Lead poisoning was the biggest problem, people shooting them illegally too. And there was a big discussion, there was a big debate among conservationists in the 1980s. People got furious about this. And a huge number of conservation biologists were saying the proper thing to do is to let this species go extinct. The biggest bird in North America, one of the most dramatic, iconic animals in the world, to let this species go extinct with dignity, right? I am glad, personally, speaking here in 2015, that other voices went out. And they went and caught those last 17 condors. They brought them to the San Diego Zoo. It took a bunch of years before they figured out how to get them to breed in captivity. But it worked eventually. And now there are more than 300 California condors flying wild around Grand Canyon and the deserts of California. How about the species right on the bottom left? It's a conifer. It's a plant, right? Plants are species that can be endangered too. And this is one called Turia Taxa. Its most common name is very flattering. It's called the stinking yew. The stinking yew lives in one place in the world, in the Florida Panhandle, in these cool little microclimates in the Florida Panhandle, in these steep ravines in the sandhills of the Florida Panhandle. And it cannot tolerate warm temperatures. Its seedlings will not germinate and grow in warm temperatures. Guess what's happening in northern Florida like the rest of the world? It's getting warmer. The adult stinking yews are doing fine. They produce seeds every year, but the seedlings go nowhere. Left on their own, this species was going to zero. And some people, they call themselves the guardians of the Turia, realized, wait a second, actually there's a little loophole. The Federal Endangered Species Act is not very fair. It treats plants really different than animals. And there is no law against taking the seeds of an endangered plant and planting it and moving it somewhere else, in fact. And these guys, wild botanists, were having the same kind of argument about California condors. Should we do something? Should we move these guys northward to a more suitable climate? Or should we watch as they disappear? Some guys who call themselves the guardians of the Turia went, got some seeds, and planted them in North Carolina, where they're doing just fine. Okay. So we're not in the deserts of California. We're not in the DRC or East Africa. We're here, right? The waterfront of Boston. And I live in Concord, about 18 miles from here, right? Most of you probably live not too far from here, right? Is this a good place to do rare species conservation in Boston? Right? Is this a good place? Is there anything worth saving as far as wildlife goes in Boston? Is there anything rare enough to care about in Boston? Is there any habitat that is of any value in Boston? If you step back, right, you don't get blinded by all these big buildings, and you look at this area with the mind of an ecologist, you say, wait a second, Boston, right, at least at one point, had all of this sandy seashore and rocky seashore. Boston had huge freshwater wetland systems, the Muddy River, all along the Fenway. Boston had all of these rocky bald habitats, like you can still see around Franklin Park. Boston had sand plains. These are all habitats that if you know New England and you know with rare species distributions in New England, sandy beaches, extensive marshy freshwater wetlands, rocky bald sand plains, those are species, those are habitats that tend to be inhabited by a lot of our rare species. Does Boston still have any rare species? How about those tall buildings? Are the tall buildings themselves a conservation opportunity? Where was this picture taken? What building? Customs House in Boston, about what, 3 blocks from here, right? In fact, Charlie was telling me, right, you used to be able to, there used to be telescopes up on the roof here and the staff could hang out. You could watch the Peregrine Falcons, it's a Peregrine Falcon. You could watch them fly around the Customs House because they are here because a biologist in the 1970s thought creatively. In the 1970s, Peregrine Falcons, the fastest moving animal on Earth, right? Talk about an iconic species. Peregrine Falcon was heading rapidly towards extinction. What was driving it especially? All kinds of problems. What was the really big thing happening in the 60s that was driving this species towards extinction? I'm going to keep bugging you about these trivialities. Fess up. I know a lot of you guys know a lot of this stuff. What was the big problem for peregrine falcons, for bald eagles, for lots of birds of prey in the 60s?
Was it DDT?
DDT and other organochlorine pesticides, right? They're incredibly successful, developed in World War II. People were using them all over, right? There were all kinds of film footage around the time that I was growing up. I don't know if I was doused. You know, there'd be like advertisements of happy kids being doused with DDT to kill all the lice and the bed bugs, right? It doesn't do anything good for peregrine falcons. Winds up in their prey, winds up in their eggs, right? Eggshells break, blah, blah, blah. You get no falcons left. While Rachel Carson was getting the world to pay attention to the underlying issue of pollution by organochlorines like DDT and eventually getting them banned from the US, though we still continue to manufacture them and sell them to other parts of the world, a biologist at Cornell, an ornithologist named Tom Cade, said, wait a second, I want to see if there's something that can be done to help the falcons now. And he realized, he experimented, he realized that you could hack peregrine falcons, and in fact, most other birds of prey. You could train young individuals, basically, to use a nesting area that you want them to. And he realized something else eventually. He realized that from a falcon's eye view, from a falcon's perspective, peregrine falcons naturally nest. If you go up to Mount Desert Island, you go to Acadia National Park, you can see naturally nesting falcons, and they nest on cliffs, on ledges on cliffs. Well, from a peregrine falcon's eye view, the ledge on the vertical side of the Customs House building is a ledge on a perfectly good cliff, and there's perfectly good birds to eat all around here, all the pigeons that are around us. And thanks to that frame shift, peregrine falcons are now off the U.S. endangered species list and doing quite well. You can see them in a lot of places, including a few blocks from here. So are there any rare species in Boston? You go on the state of Massachusetts State Division of Fisheries and Wildlife website. You go to their town species viewer, type in Boston, and you get a long list of state protected rare species, plants, animals, all kinds of animals, insects, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, that have been known to occur from inside the city limits of Boston. All those species in red, not here anymore. Right? Some of those species, doesn't matter how good, at least my imagination doesn't stretch far enough to think that there's any way of bringing common loons back as a breeding species in Boston, right? Not going to happen in the Boston Commons pond, right? But many of the rare species in green, which are still here, are actually doing okay and hanging on despite everything that's going on. In fact, anybody know about piping plovers? An iconic shorebird. In fact, the symbol of the one of the symbols of the State Natural Heritage Program, iconic rare species, endangered species. Here it's federally listed, nests on beaches and dune blowouts. People have spent many, many millions of dollars protecting piping plovers all through New England and the Midwest. On Cape Cod, right? Those of you guys who like to drive ORVs, off-road vehicles, yeah, you know all about piping plovers because lots of beaches are closed so people don't run them over. Where is the fastest growing piping plover population in Massachusetts, maybe in all of New England? Where does it live? Where do they nest? Revere Beach, right? Do they mind that Revere Beach might not be, from our point of view, as pretty as like a beach in Truro? Right? They're looking for a place where they can raise their young, find the food that they need, find the food that their young need, and Revere Beach works just fine. Here in Boston, there are rare species that we can help if we have a little bit of imagination. Some of the species that are gone, linear-leaved milkweed, has basically disappeared from northeastern Massachusetts. It's a species of dry rocky balds. Rocky balds, Franklin Park. Right? Franklin Park has lots of perfect habitat for linear-leaved milkweed. Are they going to get there on their own from the nearest extant populations, some 30, 40 miles away? No. but if somebody bothered to bring them there, might they do okay? Maybe. So here's a picture. I'm glad my kids aren't here. They would kill me, right? This was a while ago. Our son is 6'2", and he's in college. Our daughter is beautiful, almost 16-year-old, right? And here we are. We are holding 3 individual rare species, wood turtles, right? That we caught in one little tiny spot, some disgusting, scraggy-looking woodlands in Methuen, Massachusetts, right next to a really trashy garbage dump and gravel pit, surrounded by Route 495 and Route 233. And we found over several years that this spot, trashy spot near the Merrimack River, has the largest population of wood turtles in eastern Massachusetts right now. Observations like this got me to think a bit. Classically, when I've worked at state level conservation for quite a while. I'm on the state Endangered Species Program Scientific Advisory Committee. I've been there for quite some time. And for a long time, and still, in fact, when I talk to people about conservation like inside 495, most conservationists, their eyes just go blank. They're like, inside 495? It's like, that's all toast, right? Everything in there, that's dead. The only place you want to think about are like the bigger open spaces out in Western Mass or Central Mass. Well, there are a lot of rare species that are still here and still doing okay. And they can stay doing okay and maybe do even better if we give them a little bit of a leg up. So what I do now, working with our nonprofit, is I have started, and we start now, to look at things really differently, to look at habitats around here in the middle of the megalopolis and say, okay, what opportunities do we have for conservation? If we are working in an area and there is a rare species population that we're interested with, and it's still there, like those wood turtles in Methuen near the dump and the gravel pit, we say, is there anything that we can reasonably do that might help this population go beyond whatever factors are limiting them, might help them recover, might help them be restored to whatever their natural capacity is in that habitat? In cases like the linear leaf milkweed and Franklin Park, we might say, wait, even a more open-ended imaginative question, are there any habitats here that would actually support some of our rarer species still, if we gave them a chance to get here, which they can't do on their own? Can we reintroduce any species here in a responsible way with monitoring and careful consideration of their habitat requirements? Might we have any chances to bring some species back? And through all of it, we recognize one primary thing, that what matters the most in conservation success, right, and whether a particular rare species population will recover and thrive in the future or will dwindle and maybe disappear, has little to do with the amount of biology that the people who are working with them necessarily know about. That's critical. But what it has most to do with is the attitudes of the people who own that land and who live nearby there, and whether they buy into the conservation effort, whether they think that keeping wood turtles in Methuen or piping plovers in Revere or linear leaf milkweed in Franklin Park, whether they think that that's a good idea and a worthwhile thing. And if they do, then you have the possibility of perhaps doing something. So we stress getting people directly involved. Remember those people carrying, those volunteers carrying the sea turtle? People want to be directly involved, right? Not just learn about it, not just see photographs. They want to be out there directly involved in the conservation. So we try and provide them opportunities to do that. Okay. So here's an example of this curious mode of thinking. Right? When I got into being a biologist, I thought, foolishly, that I would get to do what most normal ecologists, field ecologists do. They go to really beautiful places. I'm a herpetologist mostly, so I figured I'd get to go to Madagascar, go to the Amazon, right? Go to Indonesia, Go to these really wild, cool wilderness places and do my research there. Well, actually, I wound up doing a lot of my research in places like the Concord Dump. Here's a disgusting little pond, artificial pond, that was scraped into the clay layer that sits at low elevations in the Concord Dump. On top of that is a big pile of naturally occurring sand and gravel. And to this little bullfrog, which colonized this brand new created little pond, that's a perfectly good habitat. Right? Is it possible to look at the Concord Dump and say, is there anything that you can do with this place that would be worthwhile from a conservation perspective? Well, if you ask that question, the Concord Dump is a big pile of sand and gravel with low-lying areas with clay that readily form little pools. What kind of species can do well there? These three species pictured here, right? Purple milkweed, 12-spotted tiger beetle, and the eastern spadefoot toad have a couple of things in common. One thing they have in common, like you can see with the beetle, is they like sandy areas. They like these sandplain kind of habitats. Thing number two they have in common, they all used to live in Concord. They're all valid historical records from Concord. Thoreau wrote about seeing spadefoot toads in Concord, and they're all not there now. But the dump, with its propensity, it's easy to make little vernal pools in the dump. Good spot for 12-spotted tiger beetles. Good spot for spadefoot toads, lots of sandy soil. Perfect habitat for purple milkweeds. They are not at the Concord Dump. And they are not at the Concord Dump because we have yet to convince the town of Concord that they should be. That's what will decide whether they get there or not. Okay, let me talk about a species that we actually have worked with for quite some time. It's the program that we have put most work into over the longest period of time. Blandings turtles occur throughout a swath of the northern Midwestern states, from Nebraska, spreading out along the southern reaches of the Great Lakes into Ontario. And then you have a big disjunct population so a big area where you don't find any across New York State. Then there are some in the lower Hudson River. And then eastern Massachusetts, southern New Hampshire, southern Maine, and then you skip across the Gulf of Maine, there we go, over to one population in Nova Scotia. Everywhere they occur, with the exception of a small area of eastern Nebraska, they are really rare. They are listed as protected species, some level of protected species, generally threatened or endangered in every province and state that they occur in except for Nebraska. I am now standing with a student about a mile from my house at Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Concord. The Blandings turtles are my neighbors. They live more or less in my backyard. That's how I got interested in working with them. And Great Meadows still has the third largest population of Blandings turtles left in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts has far more Blandings turtles than any other state in the Northeast, right? It's a good thing. Henry David Thoreau, Charlie was just reminding me, Henry David Thoreau caught a Blandings turtle at Great Meadows in 1854, and you can go to the Harvard MCZ where Joe Martinez works, and you can see it pickled, right? So they've been there. And so third largest population of Massachusetts, that means there are a lot of them there, right? Yeah. This same population of turtles, turns out biologists had worked with in the early 1970s. At that time, they estimated there were about 115 adults at Great Meadows. Now there are a little bit fewer than 50. That's not a good slope, right? If we know a little bit about graphs, that graph is heading nowhere good. Okay. So these are my neighbors, and I asked myself, is there anything that I can do about this? When I started working with the Blandings turtles at Great Meadows systematically about 12 years ago, this is what I thought I was going to find out was the big problem that had affected these turtles. There are big roads right outside of Great Meadows. Route 62 runs right near the refuge. And we know, turtle biologists have learned over the years, that one of the biggest problems that turtles face in urbanized areas is they get squashed by cars. Those shells that evolved 230 million years ago are pretty nifty. A Blandings turtle has a massively strong shell. The adults get to be about this big with a very high domed shell. A coyote, a bobcat, would just break its teeth chewing on a Blanding's turtle shell. Turtle would sit in there, no problem, right? But it gets hit by a Lexus, and bad things happen, right? So turtles get killed on roads. Blanding's turtles wander across the landscape more than most freshwater turtles. And so we expected that we would find that lots of the adults, if we radio track them, would wind up like this spotted turtle did. But no. The Blanding's turtles avoid the roads at Great Meadows. We've radio tracked just about every Blanding's turtle in the Great Meadows population, some of them for 12 years now. And they avoid the roads. Over that period of time, we've only recorded 2 turtles as being killed on roads. But what we did find is we have a lot of turtles that look like, if you turn the turtle upside down, take a picture of its plastron, a lot of them look like the turtle on the left. Very few of them look like the turtle on the right. Right? This is a basic demographic difference between those turtles. It's not gender. Which turtle is older? Turtle on the left or turtle on the right? What do you guys think? You got a 50-50 chance. Anybody brave? Which one's older?
I would say the one on the right.
So one on the right is older? No. Yeah, it was a good 50-50 chance, but guy on the left. How can you tell? When you ever watch a turtle walk, especially a big heavy turtle like a Blanding's turtle, do they walk, right? Legs extended the whole way, right? Shell never touching the ground? Is that how they walk? Turtles drag their shells. If you look at a turtle track, you see footprints with a big shell drag. Every time this mother turtle on the left has gone to nest or gone from one wetland to another, she drags her shell across the ground. Over time, those nice growth lines that you see on the teenage turtle on the right get wiped away, scraped away. The turtle on the left is more than 60 years old. We know that because she was marked as an adult. In Blanding's turtles, an adult female in our area needs to be at least 18 years of age. And she was already at least 18 years of age when she was marked in 1971. So she's over 60. We have a lot of turtles that look like her that were marked in the early 1970s. That means good, right? The turtles can live a long time. But wait a second. You know how like age pyramids, right? You do a little thing of like, okay, your population, human population, turtle population has like this many in the 0 to 10-year-old age group and this many in the 10 to 20. And you know, most age pyramids, they look like a pyramid, right? Broader at the bottom, kind of narrow to the top. This is an inverted pyramid. Lots of really old turtles, 60, 70, 80-year-old turtles, who knows? And very few young ones. Is that good? Not good, right? Because the older turtles, they die at some point, and there aren't any young ones to take their place. Is there anything we can do about that? Here's one thing we could do. We can find out where they nest. So we radio track every mom that we can catch. We have people out every evening in June when they nest. And we figure out, for as many of the turtles as we can, exactly where they nest. And then we protect the nest, keep predators from eating the eggs, and keep people from unknowingly disturbing the eggs. And where do the turtles nest? They mostly nest in people's front yards, right? And the residences right nearby. Are the turtles being dumb? Turtles are cold-blooded. Turtle embryos are cold-blooded. If the turtle mom wants to take good care of her babies, she's going to lay her eggs in the warmest place that she can find in general. Is this a warm spot? No covering vegetation. She laid her eggs right next to the asphalt. Blanding's turtles, if you can think of the ideal nesting spot that's most typical for Blanding's turtles in Concord, Massachusetts, this is it, within a couple of feet of a sidewalk or a driveway in a nice mulched perennial bed, right? Real easy to dig. Perfect. Great spot for the turtles. So every evening in June, we're out and we're knocking on people's doors at 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, you've got this rare turtle nesting in your yard, and do you mind if we wait until she's finished nesting? And then we usually don't put one of these cages around right away. We put a little wire screen over the nest so we can keep the predators off. We've yet to have anybody say no. And we offer a bribe with the help of the aquarium and Zoo New England. All of the people who live in that house, who are turtle nest hosts, get free passes to the aquarium and the zoo. It's a good deal. We don't stop there, though. One of the things we've learned over time is one of the problems the young turtles have at Great Meadows is young Blandings turtles really need habitat that is dominated by thick wetland shrubs. Baby turtles like to hide a lot. Baby turtles don't move a lot. Baby turtles know that they are still vulnerable. And for Blandings turtles, that ideal kind of hiding habitat is in the midst of really thick shrubs. Well, that's a problem at Great Meadows. There is not much of that thick shrub cover. So we're making some more. Leah Kablick, our intern, Blandings turtle intern for this summer, and others of us spent a lot of time schlepping 80 bales of straw this year out in canoes into the swamp and staking them down so they can float up and down on the changing water levels. And then we took cuttings of the two most important shrub species in there, buttonbush and sweetgale. This is Harry Liggett. He's the head of horticulture at Zoo New England. And there is Harry proudly growing some of our buttonbush seedlings. And a year from now, when those straw bales are nice and soft and seasoned, we're going to plant these buttonbush seedlings into those straw bales, and hopefully they will do well and create a big island of shrub habitat. And if it works, then hopefully we can get more money and more people to help us so we can make more of it and make those areas more friendly to juvenile Blandings turtles. But we don't stop there. If we just protected the nests and made a little more habitat, we would still be leaving a lot of baby turtles with pretty bad odds in the world. There's a good demographic study of Blandings turtles from Michigan that suggests that if you are a Blandings turtle, it's a good idea not to read too much about the likelihood of you living very long. If you are a baby Blandings turtle and you've just hatched from your egg, you've got about a 1 in 100 chance of living to become an adult. Not really cheery odds. So we help. How do we help? We take the babies that hatch out and we get people to raise them for 9 months. They hatch usually August, September. They're raised until about June. The New England Aquarium raises some for us. Charlie, Aaron Ellis, who's leaving here now, Joe Mazie have helped us. Zoo New England, Stone Zoo raises some for us, but almost all of them are raised by schools. For our project and 2 others that we help with, we've now had more than 40 schools participate, kids from 2nd grade on through high school. This is a 7th grader in Sudbury. Get 2 baby turtles, put them in a 20-gallon long aquarium, feed them turtle food. Couldn't be more artificial. Raise them for 9 months, and then we let them go. How well do you think they do after we let them go? They've been kept in a tank, and we say thanks. They're nice and big. We let them go in the swamp. Well, there's a little trick behind this. The trick is, do you think they're growing at the same rate inside the school as they're growing outside? Between September and June? What are those guys outside doing between September and June if they haven't gotten eaten or run over, or et cetera? They are not doing much. The water, right, is frozen. In fact, they are hitting May smaller. They've lost weight all winter long. The turtles in the tank, where we've got a heater keeping them warm, warmer they are, the faster they eat, they are growing like little turtle pigs. Okay, check out the girl, the turtle, the shirt she's wearing. Same girl, same shirt, same turtle 9 months later. This turtle started out at 10 grams. This particular individual is over 200 now. It's 9 months old chronologically, but it's the size of a 5-year-old. Will it be better able to withstand the possibility of predation from things like chipmunks, which eat a lot of baby turtles, blue jays, grackles, garter snakes, bullfrogs? We can make all kinds of hypotheses, but we need to find out. So we radio track a lot of them, and we catch them. We've radio tracked about 100 since we've released them. Not all of them make it. But what we've learned is we are giving them about a 40-fold increase in their likelihood of survival. If you start out with 1,000 Blandings turtle eggs, our best knowledge of Blandings turtles suggests that by the time they get to be 14 years old, fewer than 10 of those eggs will still be alive as 14-year-old turtles. And 14 is just the cusp of adulthood for males, not even close for females. If we protect their nests so we keep the raccoons and the skunks from eating them, we can about triple that number. But if we raise them for 9 months and let them go at the size of a 4 or 5-year-old wild turtle instead of a little teeny 50-cent piece with a soft shell, we're giving them about a 40-fold boost in their likelihood of reaching adulthood. And if it works at Great Meadows, maybe it'll work elsewhere. We are now starting a similar project in southeastern Massachusetts, and we're reintroducing Blanding's turtles to one new site in Concord, and we're hoping to a new site in Andover soon. Another species we work with, the same eastern spadefoot toad, which you guys remember, right? Like sandy soil, rarest amphibian in Massachusetts. Way rarer than they used to be. They have collapsed basically everywhere in inland Massachusetts. There are a few little populations left in the Connecticut River Valley. They used to be in Concord, right? Henry David Thoreau wrote about them, all gone from Concord. Used to be in Framingham, Cambridge, Boston, Danvers, Ipswich, right? Gone, 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 gone. They're still on Cape Cod. Why have they disappeared so much? We don't know for sure, but by learning about, by studying the ecology of these species, we think we have a good idea as probably what their most limiting factor is. Where do spadefoot toads start out their lives? What kind of habitats? Where do they breed? Where does mom lay her eggs? In vernal pools, right? But not in your average kind of vernal pool, right? Like where a sane animal like a spotted salamander or a wood frog would lay its eggs. Spadefoot toads live wild. They lay their eggs in the shallowest, most ephemeral vernal pools imaginable because their tadpoles are completely unable to withstand predation from insects. They can't lay their eggs in a spotted salamander kind of nice, long, flooded vernal pool. They lay their eggs in these little ditches, depressions, hollows that flood only after heavy rains and are usually dry in a few weeks or a month or so afterwards. When people develop a landscape, do you think they leave those things? Those like 50-foot wide kind of annoying places in the middle of your cornfield or in the middle of your front lawn that flood, get a couple of feet deep after a heavy rain, those are the first things that people fill in and drain. If people can destroy these ephemeral vernal pools, is it possible for people to make them? No biggie. We have now made 2 reintroduction sites on Cape Cod. To date, we've made 13 different spadefoot toad breeding ponds, and this year, in a couple of months, we'll be making the first 2 closer to here in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and we hope to do this elsewhere too. We've reintroduced spadefoot toads to the 2 new sites on Cape Cod. Takes them about 6 years to grow up. We're still waiting, crossing our fingers. We know some of them are still alive, and hopefully in another few years, we'll start to get lots of adults. And the cool thing again is this gives lots of opportunities for people to get involved. For our Blanding's turtle work, we have more than 2,000 kids a year in Massachusetts who get involved with head-starting Blanding's turtles. Spadefoot toads, similarly, we get thousands of kids to help us raise tadpoles until they're little toadlets. Here are a bunch of little guys releasing little guy spadefoot toads. And we get adults to help us make the ponds. It's a lot of work. In this case, we're making a pond in an upland area. So to hold water, we're putting a plastic liner down on the bottom and then burying it. So we get a lot of people involved in the work. Here's a picture that Joe Martinez, who is a herpetologist at the Harvard Museums, just sent me. And Joe also taught me something important about doing conservation, right? I tend to get focused on what is rare at the state level, but rarity depends on your scale. Spadefoot toads, you could ask a very valid question and say, why are we worried about spadefoot toad conservation in Massachusetts? Eastern spadefoot toads are common as whatever in North Carolina. They're rare in the Northeast. They're rare in New York. They're rare in New Jersey. They're rare in Massachusetts. They're rare in Connecticut. Why should we worry about them up here? What's the biggie if they disappear in the Northeast, if there are still a lot of spadefoot toads in North Carolina? Have we lost something if we lose them in the Northeast? It's an open question. I think we have. I live here in Massachusetts. I would like to be able to see Spadefoot toads without having to get on a bus or a plane and go down to North Carolina. And they used to live here. Joe Martinez has been reintroducing species that most herpetologists regard as common: spring peepers, American toads, and now great tree frogs, to an area where they are not common, to Mount Auburn Cemetery in Watertown and Cambridge, where up until a few years ago there were no American toads and spring peepers and great tree frogs. And now, because Joe has been smart enough to work with animals that grow up in 2 years instead of 20, now you can go to Mount Auburn Cemetery in the spring and you can have toads and spring peepers sing to you. And that's the first opportunity for people from that area to hear those frogs in probably, what, a couple hundred years, maybe 100 years, who knows. We also work with a fish. This little fish, the Bridle Shiner, 2 inches long. A big fat gravid female is maybe a good 2 inches long. Used to be one of the most common species on the coastal plain of the US. They disappeared completely from Maryland, all but gone in Pennsylvania, all but gone in North Carolina, far less abundant in Massachusetts than they once were. In eastern Massachusetts, they're almost all gone, but there's one spot that has a lot of Bridle Shiners, still has a good population. It's here. Can anybody tell me where this Google Earth photo is showing? And this is a place, it's hard to recognize from space, this is a place where I'm wagering that pretty much all of you guys have been. It is, let's see if I can get my thingy. See this big kind of wasteland? The Burlington Mall. Vine Brook, where the Bridle Shiners live, used to go right through where the Burlington Mall was built. It was rerouted into a ditch that runs around the side of the Burlington Mall, under Burlington Mall Road. Then it comes through this little well field, crosses under Middlesex Turnpike, right over by Route 62, parallels all of these massive developments. And somehow, in this ridiculously urbanized stream system, that stream system is loaded with rare fish, with Bridle Shiners, with creek chub suckers, with tessellated darters, with fish that are really rare in eastern Massachusetts. I don't really know why. How are they able to persist, and why do they do so well there? If we are able to, as we've been doing, better understand that answers to that question, then we can ask another one. We can say, if we can really understand what makes Vine Brook such good habitat for this really rare fish, then maybe through captive breeding, which we can already do. Scott Dowd, an aquarist for the New England Aquarium, has been breeding Bridle Shiners for years here at the aquarium. It's not very hard to do. If we can understand what they need for habitat, if we can breed them in captivity, then perhaps we can find other places here in eastern Massachusetts where Bridle Shiners could also thrive. Or maybe we could manage those ponds and streams to make them places where they can thrive. So, all in the same vein, I'll just go over these last couple of examples more quickly. Marbled salamanders, our rarest salamander, beautiful animal. Marbled salamanders, you now have to go down to the Blue Hills to find any marbled salamanders. Marbled salamanders, however, used to live in, was there a Cambridge record? There are records from the Middlesex Fells, records from the Lynn Woods. And guess what? Habitat in the Middlesex Fells is still there. There's over 100 documented vernal pools where these species breed in the Middlesex Fells. The trees are back. It was once deforested in the early 20th century. The woods are back. These are animals that live in the forest, breed in vernal pools, and Middlesex Fells has lots of both. Can we bring them back there? We're going to get our chance to do first trial reintroduction next year. And we work with some plants too. In that red list, right? Remember when I showed you the list of rare species in Boston? One of the plants in that red list was this beautiful flower. This is New England blazing star. Any of you guys grow liatris in your gardens? Right? It's a gorgeous species. It's flowering right now. They're all Native Americans, mostly from the prairie states. New England blazing star is the only one that got up here. It used to be, there are historical records from Boston, from Cambridge, from Lexington, from Woburn, from Concord, from Lexington, from pretty much every town in and around Boston. They are all gone. The nearest blazing star population that's left in the wild is one little tiny population left in Hamilton. But blazing stars need sandy soil, and we've got a lot of sandy soil in eastern Massachusetts. Is it possible to reintroduce them? We're finding out. We figured out how to, from the few remaining seed sources, we figured out how to germinate seeds very easily. And we're recruiting volunteers to help us do this on a bigger scale next year. Yesterday, I brought this first pile of about 70 seedlings over to Harry Liggett at the zoo, and he's going to propagate them for another year while we work on permitting to reintroduce these guys and to start learning about exactly what kind of conditions might permit us to do successful reintroductions of this species that's not only important in of itself, but is a really important nectar source for many declining pollinators like bees and butterflies. So this is not a picture of me, but Allison Robbins, my wife, and I, before we got married, we went on a long 3-week kayaking trip on this river, the Noatak River in northwestern Alaska. If I had my druthers, and I could live anywhere in the world and still manage to make a living and be in touch with my family and all those other things, right? I would rather be in a place that looks a little more like this than in a place that's like right near the Concord dump. But I don't live in northwestern Alaska. I live here, right, in eastern Massachusetts. And in fact, most of us in the world live in places that look a lot more like, right, eastern Massachusetts than the Noatak River wilderness. I find cheer in a message that was spelled out really well by this author, Emma Maris, in a wonderful book that has some great insight into conservation philosophy, conservation ethics in the 21st century, Rambunctious Garden. And I'm just going to read you a quote, if I can, without my reading glasses, by Emma Maris from this book. She says, "We can't go back. We can't have this pristine wilderness that we've always dreamed of. And this sounds like a huge tragedy. It sounds like we've lost the battle. But actually, what I've realized is that it can be exciting and invigorating to give up on pristine wilderness as your goal, because then you can have all kinds of other goals, and you can go out and create more nature everywhere." So while I'm here in eastern Massachusetts, that's what I'll be trying to do. And I invite you to also get involved with us, right? We're all about trying to get people to do this stuff hands-on. So anyway, thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. The question was referring to the death of Cecil the Lion, a particularly well-known lion, male lion, who lived in Wangwe, I think, National Park in Zimbabwe, who was killed recently by, I believe, a dentist from Minnesota who paid $50,000, maybe not incredibly legally, to a guide who lured, they drove, from what my understanding, they drove around the national park with like a dead goat or antelope or something tied to the bumper of their Land Rover, got the lion to follow them outside the boundaries of the national park, where the dentist very heroically shot the lion with a bow and arrow, right, and presumably took the head as a trophy. That's his deal. Like, apparently this guy, that's what he does around the world. So I believe the question, if I got it right, was what do I think of that, given the fact that some people have made the argument that, hey, this $50,000 kind of deal that this guy paid, right, that can be money that helps further conservation. If you're asking me personally, I think it sucks. If you're asking me personally, I think the idea, because we need to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and to try and engender a sense of stewardship for species by taking money from people who pay to kill them in kind of staged affairs like that strikes me as really wrong-headed. But that's me. I will, though, ask you one thing. You prefaced your remarks by saying that this has been a really bad week for conservation. I would ask you to consider this. If the same thing happened 40 years ago, would the world be in an uproar about it? Not too long ago, this was pretty accepted behavior, right? For rich white guys to go to Africa and shoot whatever they wanted and cut off their heads and stick them on a wall. The world now has made a big stink about this. That, to my mind, is some semblance of progress. The question is about whether people should intervene with the cubs of this particular lion, because maybe if another male moved in, which lions do, right, we might kill the cubs. I really am not I'm a herpetologist from Massachusetts, so I'm not going to answer specific what's the best way to deal with lions, but the question you bring up is a good one, and it bears some thought, right? I'm talking about a very interventionist conservation ethic, and it is not without its problems. You know the Chinese saying, supposedly a Chinese saying, that if you save somebody, right, you wind up responsible for them? It was a lot easier to live in a world in which we could presume that all those other species would take care of themselves just fine, thank you. We just need to do what we need to do. When we start taking responsibility for the welfare of other species, that's a big burden, right? The aquarium does that every day. All these thousands of animals that the aquarium cares for, it's a big burden. And if we start treating the outside world more and more like an aquarium or a zoo, right, it's a big burden to take on. It's not without its problems and its issues. Yeah, so the question is, right, there are a bunch of different listed species. I showed you a list of species that are on state protected list and either used to occur or still occur in Boston. The question is whether there are interactions between those species. And yes, for sure, but something interesting about rare species conservation, if you really think about it, it gets towards the ethics of it too. A lot of people make the argument, if they're trying to argue for why we should bother protecting things like purple milkweed or spadefoot toads or Blanding's turtles, right? They make the argument that if we lose species X, that bad things are going to happen to us, right? Our ecosystems are going to collapse. A problem a little bit with that argument is when things are rare and maybe have been rare for a while, right? If you really think about it from an ecosystem's perspective, they're no longer really big players in the ecosystems. There are no predators that live in Massachusetts that really focus on eating Blanding's turtles, except for a few in just a couple of places, right? There are few insect species that are still alive in Massachusetts that are making their living eating or getting nectar from blazing stars alone, because there are so few blazing stars. So there are interactions, but what we can perhaps hope is to get those interactions to happen once again, because when species get as rare as New England blazing stars are in New England or in eastern Massachusetts, then those interactions have largely broken down. But if we can establish some large new populations of New England blazing stars, then the pollinators and the things that eat the pollinators, et cetera, then those interactions can occur once again too. Great. Well, thank you very much.
What's that? Chow time. That's what that is. That is a very, very big lion's mane jelly, and they are absolutely delicious, apparently.